Today, we are celebrating a wonderful book and wonderful speakers. So with that, I'm going to actually just jump right in and invite Janice and Tommy to the stage to join me in the chairs. And I'm going to read their bios. I know many of you already know Janice and Tommy, but Janice Munemitsu is the author of The Kindness of Color, the history of her family's incarceration and their farm's connection with the landmark federal court case, Mendez versus Westminster, which led to the desegregation of California public schools in 1947. And she has a private practice as a spiritual director as well. And then, of course, Tommy Dyo, who leads Epic Movement and has years of experience advocating for the API community, as well as consulting for Asian American Leadership Center and so many other projects. Both of them have so many other projects that I didn't list, but I'm sure we'll get into today. And when we initially proposed this, we were like, we'll talk about Janice's book, and we'll do a book talk on the kindness of color. And then a bit of time into planning, my colleague Elizabeth was like, so Janice actually wants to bring Tommy in and do this talk called Camp Leftovers, and can we do that? And so, of course, we were happy to kind of expand out. But I'd love to just start, if you could talk a little bit about yourself, Janice, open it up and talk about your family's history and why this format, this topic, instead of just your book.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I can turn that on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all coming. This is way more than we expected today. I was going to talk about the book, and I'll just briefly tell you the story is about our family's journey. We're originally from Kochiken. My grandfather came in 1916, but during World War II, he at that time owned a 40-acre farm. And through the kindness of the community and others he knew in the community, he was able to lease that farm to a family called Mendez. When the Mendez family moved from Santa Anita to Westminster, which is maybe 8 miles, they could not go to the public school there, his children, because their children were Mexican. And there was a segregated school system. So what the book is about is that journey of our family, and also how the Mendez and 4 other families led through federal court, actually led the case to desegregate California in 1947. So that's what our book is about. But as I was doing that research and talking to friends and family about it, one of the things that keeps coming up is these artifacts. Some of these artifacts are tangible, and some of these artifacts from the camp are emotional. But how I describe these artifacts are, it either has something to do with our behavior or an emotion that have impacted not just the 10 survivors in my family of the camps, but still in my generation and in our family impact our lives today. And so I got this idea of Camp Leftovers, and I talked to a lot of people, and I said, Tommy, what do you think about this idea? And he said, it's a good idea. And I said, great, you want to do it with me? So, and part of it was our family was all in Poston, Arizona. And you'll hear more. Tommy's family were in several of the camps. So we wanted to bring more of a range of story. And also, we're from different parts of Southern California, different experiences. So I wanted to kind of broaden it. So that's why it went from just a book to this idea of leftovers.
I thought it was about food. And so I was excited to join her about food, and all of a sudden it's about history, and I kind of got looped into this. So
yeah, that's after. Food's coming.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll eat later.
So let me just give you kind of that's a little bit about my family. This is the Munemitsu side of our family. My grandfather came in 1916. He married my grandmother in 1921, and so she came to America, and that's essentially their wedding picture. They would have 2 sons and 2 daughters, my dad being the oldest, my uncle, and then twin little girls who are 13 years younger than my dad, in the cute little white dresses there. During the war, we had the 40-acre farm, and my grandfather, it was actually under my dad's name. He was in his early 20s, but he had to be under his name as American citizen, my grandfather, under the alien land law. And the citizenship rules at that time could not own that land. And so it was actually under my dad's name. So as a young man, he was a landowner. And on the day that they were supposed to go to camp. You'll notice in that picture you don't see my grandfather. It's my grandmother, my uncle, my dad, and my 2 aunts. That's because my grandfather, just a few days before they were to leave for Poston, my grandfather was arrested by the FBI on that Westminster farm and accused of spy activity. If you knew my grandfather, and some people here in our audience, some of my friends did know my grandfather, they would say that there's no way he's a spy. But because he was seen as a community leader, he was active in the community and people knew him, they used that as an excuse to enough to say that he could be trouble. He could be a spy for Japan. And so he was taken by the FBI on that farm and did not see the rest of the family for 2.5 years. So that's why in the previous picture to the right, you see my grandmother with the 2 young girls and my dad and his brother. On my mother's side of the family, they too are from Orange County, from Santa Anita. This story I don't know that much about, and I think this is one of the camp leftovers, the emotional impact. When I asked my mom and her sister, they said, we don't remember too much, or this is what we know, but we don't remember them too much. But their father, actually, I find out, he had farmed before the war over 350 acres in Orange County. So he was a big farmer in sugar beets and lima beans in that area of Santa Ana. I think in this case there was a lot of loss, and that's why they don't talk and didn't talk or didn't want to share much. And they probably blocked it out, quite honestly. But in this other picture you see, the first picture shows them as my mother and her sister as 2 young girls with their father and their mother. In the picture at Poston, they're standing by this rock pile that shows up in a lot of our Poston pictures. Maybe everything else was desert, so it made a good backdrop. I don't know. But you can see it's only the grandfather, or my grandfather, their father, and my aunt and my mom. And that's because their mom had passed away in the camp 8 months after they got there. So on this side, my maternal side of the family, there's a lot more obvious loss, both emotional. My grandmother went to camp, never came back, and somewhere in that process, I don't know the whole story, but somewhere in that process, my grandfather went from a farmer of 350-some acres to just where the house, they did retain the house and had a house to come home to, but much more obvious sorrow in that part of the story. So that's a little overview of some of the people we'll be talking about from my side of the family.
Thanks. Yeah, my family's, my wife is a professor of nursing at Long Beach State. My son is a nurse, does oncology. And my daughter just got Nisei Week Princess, Miss Tomodachi, so a little bragging. And she's doing a lot of stuff in the community. And I'm really proud of her for really stepping out and being an advocate, telling these stories, being part of who we are as Japanese Americans. And one of the things is, why do I do this stuff? Not just because I got looped in by Janice, but I really feel connected to our community and to our story, and I feel connected to people who are not Japanese. And everybody that's in here has a special connection, and we'll talk about those weird connections that we have later. But there's an ancient text that says this: if one part suffers, everybody suffers with it. If one part is honored, everybody rejoices with it. And as you hear these stories of the Japanese American community, you'll hear suffering, and we suffer together as a community. But we also rejoice together on the high sides, on the fun side. But my side is kind of weird. It's a fun story. If you know anything about the Fukui family, for those who aren't in the Japanese American community, I come from a line of undertakers. We have Fukui Mortuary. It was established in the 1930s, and it's going on its 5th generation of ownership in the family. And it takes care of probably about, 70% of the Japanese Americans that die in the LA basin probably go to Fukui Mortuary. And I think what their success is understanding the cultural nuance of being Japanese American, Asian American, and they don't do just Japanese folks, but they've really invested in the community. They're very much part of the community. And my grandfather went from Japan. My great grandfather went from Japan to Hawaii. And then my grandfather was born in Hawaii in the 1800s. And so much so that he was actually a veteran of World War I. And when we did the slide, he's a veteran of World War I for the U.S. and not for Japan. So he was a patriot. He was an American patriot. My dad's side of the family is a little more sordid past. They went from Sendai. My grandfather went from Sendai to Chihuahua, Mexico. And that's all the people that have the name Joe, D-Y-O, is in this photo. Okay, and we'll go back to this photo a little bit later. But that's our family. It's very, very few of us. But my grandfather started a mine in Chihuahua, Mexico in the early 1900s and had a very successful mine business. And at that period of time, there was this whole revolution that was happening in the Mexican Revolution. And he had a run-in with Pancho Villa to the point which he knew him pretty well. Pancho Villa trusted him. The U.S. government found my grandfather and hired him to assassinate Pancho Villa. So don't drink the coffee. That's a whole story for another time, okay? But I just wanted to kind of whet your appetite with that. That's another. We'll pick that up at Janum.
I told him he should write a book.
Yeah, that'll become later. So that's my dad's side of the family. Now, a little bit of history overview for those who want to catch up on it. December 7th, 1941 was a date that will remain in infamy, where Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. By the way, if you go to Japan and you go to the museum, it says December 8th. Well, because they're a day ahead of us. And so it kind of messed me up on my history there. But anyway, obviously that was an incredible time for our country. And how do we feel that? We feel that maybe 9/11, or we might have that same kind of emotional gut when we hear that in our generation. But obviously it turned our country on its head. One of the reactions was that during wartime hysteria, all these Japanese on the West Coast, are they going to do things bad to our country? We should round them up. Kind of sounds familiar a little bit, huh? So President Roosevelt signed Executive 9066 that led to the incarceration ultimately of 125,000 Japanese, primarily on the West Coast. It had happened in Japan, Hawaii a little bit, and also other parts, but primarily on the West Coast. And understand that there are anywhere from 50 to 36% of the people who were incarcerated were under 19 years old. Children, kids, high school kids. And then 70% of the people who were incarcerated were born in the United States. So we were Americans. People like my grandfather who fought in World War I. People like my grandfather on the other side who risked his life to serve this country as an agent. So very controversial time. Very significant time in our history, and that's why we are here, ultimately. Because of that, we have a lot of baggage. Both good stuff in our refrigerator, leftovers, and stuff that's not so fresh anymore that we probably need to deal with. And that's what we're going to be addressing. So understand some of the camps that we're from. The yellow is, there's a beautiful watercolor that I'll get into a little bit later. But this is kind of the size of the camps. Some camps had 14,000 people in them. I mean, these places had more people in that camp than the state had people, or the biggest city in that city. So it's very significant in terms of the numbers. I guess I do that. So I'll tune that out a little bit later. My mom was at Heart Mountain. My family went eventually to Heart Mountain, and she was part of the USO. And my grandfather was an undertaker there, and all kinds of stuff about Heart Mountain. But I want to show you kind of the journey of my family. And I want to stand up because let's see if this will work. My family had nobody just went to camp. They had different journeys. So my mom's family was in L.A. Let me show you a little bit. The stars are the 10 WRA camps. It's War Relocation Authority. And those were run by the civilian group. The other camps were temporary holding sites. Some were run by the Department of Justice. Okay, and we'll unpack that a second. But my mom's family went from, my pointer ain't going to work, from LA to Santa Anita Racetrack, so just up the street, to Heart Mountain, way up north. And my mom talks about it was so cold there, by the time they went from the shower to the barracks, her washcloth would be frozen stiff, things like that. My dad's, after not after war, but when they had early release, they just went eastward to Cleveland, Ohio. And a lot of Japanese were allowed to leave early and go east. They weren't allowed to go back to the West Coast. My dad's family, after Mexico, ended up in a place called Summerlin, California, or Carpinteria, California, high rent area, and they were farmers. They were finally going to make money, and the war broke out. They got sent to Tulare, which is right if you see Pomona, Manzanar, left of that's Tulare Assembly Center. From Tulare, they went to Gila River. And from Gila River, my grandfather was speaking out about some stuff, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And he was sent to Lordsburg, New Mexico, which was Department of Justice camp. He was interviewed by the FBI, and there wasn't a good outcome for him. Then he went to Santa Fe, you can see it in the middle, and back down to Crystal City, Texas. In Crystal City, Texas, there were Germans, Japanese, and Italians, and people from Peru. And so that's a whole story behind that. So that's kind of the overview of the camp experience, and many Japanese had that. So if you have Japanese relatives, or if you know people in the Japanese American community, one of the common questions will be, what camp were you at? And that's not a fun camp. That's the incarceration center that they were at. So again, 125,000 Japanese Americans, roughly, more than that actually, but that's a better number than 110, because that was published in books, and 120 was published in books. Depends how you ask that question. Anyway, that's the overview of my family and overview of the camp experience. If you need more, go to Janum website.
Yeah. Thank you for that plug. I mean, yeah, so this is a story that is so core to what Janum tells here. We have many objects and stories from World War II as well as before and after. We really say that we start from early immigration, early 1800s to the present day is what we cover. But then, of course, folks like Janice have also gathered resources. I know you have some on your website as well. Thank you for shouting out Janum there as well. But also as many other ones, and also your own personal connections and stories. So I would love if we could dive a little bit into that. And, when we were talking about this program, you provided some specific and personal objects to show and to help promote and market, but they have a really deep meaning for you and history. So I would love if you could talk about these tangible physical artifacts and their relation to your family.
Okay, we have an artifact table here. Thank you, Joy. Also, just so while we have this map up, if you look over to where the California-Arizona border is, you'll see Poston, Poston. It is right on the other side of the Colorado River in Arizona, and it is a Colorado River Indian tribe reservation. It was that in 1942. It continues to be that today. That is where all 10 members of my Issei and Nisei family were. And you might say, well, how did this end up being on the Japanese American incarceration camp end up being on a Native American reservation? Well, it wasn't the Native Americans' idea. They were told this is where it's going to be. They didn't really want to have any part of it, but the government put almost 18,000 Japanese Americans in the middle of this desert. And in 1942, that made Poston the third largest community behind Phoenix and Tucson. So just the magnitude of moving that many people into the desert is pretty weighty. So let's go into some artifacts. This is my dad's tools tell his story, or at least parts of his story. And you see two kind of makeshift tools there. This is the hammer. On one part of the handle here it says TM. His nickname was Tad, so Tad Munemitsu. But in the little inset here, I wrote Camp 1, 44-6B. And engraved in this handle is 44-6B. So this was Camp 1, Poston, Block 44, Barrack 6, Unit B. Now, when you look at this handle, or this hammer, it's a little odd, because it's kind of out of sync. The hammerhead is very small, and then it has kind of a longer handle. And if you can come and see it later, but you can tell this wasn't manufactured this way. This hammerhead was taken into the camp, and then they made the handle to fit it after, because you couldn't take any weapons or tools. A hammer could be a weapon into the camps. So this tells me a lot about what they were thinking, like, okay, when we get there, we're going to need some tools. Also, this file they somehow got this metal file in that didn't have a handle, and so you could see they made a handle with a tree trunk or a tree branch. Some people say, how do you know this was from camp? And I'm like, because on our farm, even in the 1930s and 40s, we had like real tools, right? But these are obviously thought out, like we'll take part what we can get in and then make a handle later, so it's a usable tool. But I can't even imagine the story this little hammer could tell, because the only reason my dad would put his address in camp on it is I'm sure it just got passed around. Oh, you need to fix something, or you want to put, a picture on the wall, or you want to put up some curtains. So this little hammer has a story that I can't tell, but we can only imagine where it's been and who's used it, and maybe how far it went. It may have been used by more people than our family even knew. Another thing that, and people often ask me, how do you know all this stuff? And I was like, well, I guess I looked through every box that our family had. When my parents both had passed, I had to clear out the house, and so I'd go through and find these things. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I'm like, huh. And if it was interesting, I just had a box and I threw it in the box. And then I went back later and I looked. And this is one of the things I just thought, oh, this is a leather notepad, kind of nice. But my dad wrote Lincoln S. Munemitsu, November 15th, 1943, Santa Fe, New Mexico. So here's where the puzzle begins. His name is Seiko Lincoln. His middle name was named after President Lincoln. My grandfather was very patriotic. Our family room in his house, he always had a picture of George Washington on that family room wall. He also names his son Lincoln with a middle name. My dad's birthday was the day after President Lincoln's, on February 13th. But I've never seen this where my dad used Lincoln as his first name. 1943, and I think that was one of his ways of showing I'm an American. He didn't write it as S.L. Munemitsu, which was typical, or Seiko, or Tad. He put Lincoln S. The other thing that's interesting about this little notepad is November 15th, 1943, Santa Fe, New Mexico. My father went from Westminster Farm to Poston, Arizona, and then he went through the indefinite leave program, which after about a year, if they proved by 2 very poorly worded questions that they had loyalty to the U.S., they could go and work in the Midwest or East Coast. And he took that opportunity to go work because part of it was they need to figure out how to pay property tax on the farm to be able to hold it during those years. So he went to Colorado to work in a foundry and also to work on some farms. But this is Santa Fe. What was he doing in Santa Fe? Well, a little bit more research showed me that my grandfather, who was taken by the FBI in May of 1942, actually was released from that Santa Fe camp in November of 1943. So my dad had to somehow have traveled to Santa Fe to see his father, and bought this little leather book to commemorate it, and saved it. I never saw this as a child. It was in one of the drawers after he passed. But another way of him telling his story, a story that, again, this little notebook could tell us more, right? On my mom's side, I found a lot of things. Thread wrapped around cardboard. It was in one box. I'm like, what's this? I open it up, and it had all these little artifacts of this little hand-sewn bag that you pull it out, there's thread wrapped around cardboard, a Santa Ana High School button. She spent her senior year in Poston, but Santa Ana High School was her high school. This little kind of Japanese material bag, that is all hand-stitched. So it gives you kind of a clue, like, okay, this box is from camp. The other thing I found, was this. And even Tommy looked at it and goes, oh yeah, those handles. There's so many things made out of this type of wood that are from the camps. Bird pins, other boxes. We have several boxes. But my mom wrote her name Yone here, right? Most of this bag is hand-stitched. There's some that it's actually stitched by a sewing machine, but there was in Poston a school of sewing, a school of tailoring. And so at some point she may have had access to a sewing machine. But again, this is the 1940s. You know, this is a bag that she probably used to go around the camp. She had a job in one of the offices there, and probably, you know, had a lot of time to stitch up a little purse. Another thing I found, and again, sometimes you don't recognize these things until after your parents pass, but I remember asking my mom once, and this is, she's on the right, my aunt is on the left, her sister, and here's that rock pile again with an American flag at the top. And I, after my mom passed, she was very healthy and passed very suddenly. And so as I'm going through her things, she was very neat. You open the drawers and everything's neatly put in there. But I thought, this is very strange. I opened a drawer and it was pieces of cardboard, all sizes. This is just 2 sizes, but, you know, letter size, legal size, small sizes of cardboard, and a bunch of American flags. Whether this one's a cloth one, but she had cut out magazine articles with a picture of the flag, newspapers, little stickers, anything that she saw that had an American flag was in this drawer. And as I had talked to her, I mean, I never asked, like, why do you save all these American flags? But I think these items really represent freedom. She also collected small little ceramic frogs. We had frogs in our gardens. She had little frog stickers. And I said, what does frog mean to you? Because why do you like them so much? And she goes, they mean kaeru. They mean come home, right? Again, she's an 18-year-old young teenager in camp, and that frog meant the hope of coming home. The flag meant it flew over this camp on this rock pile. This is the only picture I have where you see the flag at the top. But the hope that the freedom that they're promised would really, you know, still be there after this war, that they would still be able to return home. And the cardboard, probably less about freedom and more about keeping the dust out of the barrack. But they used cardboard to put in the little crevices between the wood walls. I mean, these are tar paper barracks. Even today, it's very windy in Poston. I think the one thing that all the camps have in common is wind, dust, and then more wind. But cardboard, they used to, you know, use it for a lot of things. And so it was a very precious material that we probably just recycle today. But we had a whole drawer of it. And my dad's sister came over when I was cleaning out my mom's house, and I said, come here, come look at this. She was only 7 years old in camp, and she's like, oh my gosh, your mom saved cardboard? I said, this whole drawer, you know, a stack like this. But I think those are some of the leftovers, and quite honestly, I'm guilty of it too. I save cardboard. Because, you know, I don't have to keep the wind out of my house, but I have used it. One time, actually, I had termites crawling through a windowsill, and once I cleaned it up, I called the termite guy, and then I stuffed cardboard in there, and he's like, that's clever. I said, thank you. And that just happened a couple years ago. But, you know, some of these things you remember, and, you know, try it. If you have an insect, the guy can't come too quick, you just stick it in there and block the thing out. But I think the point is they had to be really resourceful to figure out how, with very little, how were they going to survive this really terrible climate and the conditions, not just physical conditions, but also the emotional impact.
So our leftovers, our physical artifacts aren't as 3D, but you have stuff maybe from your parents, your grandparents that you have, and oh, it's cute, it's interesting, but there's nothing behind it until you start to unfold some of the research behind it. So this photo, this watercolor was done by my uncle Soichi Fukui, and we know that because he signed it. But barracks, normal barracks, probably Heart Mountain, right? That's what I would assume. Now, I was walking in a 626 market at Santa Anita racetrack, and I was looking around, and I looked up, and I saw this gigantic blue structure, right? This gigantic blue, and that was the grandstands. And I go, oh my goodness, I know exactly where this watercolor is done now. And that blue thing is a superstructure of Santa Anita racetrack. No idea when we had that photo for decades. It's just watercolor of the barracks. That was it. And there's two other watercolors that he did. And one of the watercolors was of these mountains. And the mountains didn't make sense either because they were soft mountains. They were soft hills. That's the San Gabriel's. That was because it was not Heart Mountain. And it was just so stark to realize, oh my gosh, this is time and place as an artifact. So when you do a little sleuthing in your stuff, you hold on to it forever, and you start to unfold these stories, and they're much deeper than just a watercolor of barracks. And so I looked around, and I go, yeah, I think we can find that. So that superstructure, that same angle, is the superstructure of the barracks above the thing. And fortunately, and that's my mom's family. My mom told the story and as our grandparents have passed down, and you go to the camp, and there's a burlap back, a canvas bag, and a pile of straw, and that's the mattress you stuff. And my mom's a teetotaler. This is going to be a little bit PG. I don't want to say a little swear word, but they were in the nice stall. They were in a horse stall, because we were a family, and it smelled like horse shit and piss. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is I want to get the emotional side of, my mom's a blue-haired, cute little church lady. And for her to say that with that kind of emotion, it means something very different than just a swear word. So it's a very significant piece to find something like that. Now, my dad's side's kind of weird. Man, he's a player. Why is there the term white person, Hakujin lady in the photo, the other one says, to Ken. What the heck? My dad is now he worked in the hospital, so he had a good ratio. He had a good ratio of people that he can meet. But if you look at the date, Helga Volker, Crystal City, Texas, says time and date, January 1940, left for Germany, January 2nd, 1944. That's weird. The war wasn't over. Why is she going back to Germany? And then this other one, Dear Ken, hoping you'll never forget Crystal City Internment Camp Hospital where we have met. Wishing you all the luck in the world. I will remain yours. Oh, a little steamy. October 21st, 1944. Why are they leaving for Germany when the war is still active? So I'd never figured that out. Just never understood what those meant until I read a book called Train to Crystal City. And I knew that there were Germans, Japanese, and Italians in camp. But as we put this together, these gals were being sent back to Germany as prisoner exchange. Crazy, huh? So their parents were loyal to Germany. The kids were just like us. And so I actually reached out to the German Historical Society of Crystal City to see if we can find their relatives in Germany. And we haven't gotten a hit yet. We don't even know if they're alive. We don't even know if they made it because they were treated horribly as Americans going back to Germany. So some of those things that you dig up are just, you just don't know what's in your closet. What do these flags mean? What do these artifacts mean? What do these photos mean? And part of that leftovers is for us to kind of dig through those and try to uncover what's behind those.
Thank you both so much. I think it's so powerful to be able to really hold this history in our hands. At JANM, our collection is what we consider the core of the museum. We say we have over 150,000 objects. That is a count that it's probably more, but that's 150,000 stories. I think often folks are say 125,000 people, or were incarcerated. That's 125,000 stories. And just the ways in which it's so important to preserve this. Both, we take objects into our collection. Our collection is built from donations from people. Vast majority is people giving us objects to keep safe, to preserve. But also we know how important it is for folks to keep their own objects and preserve and protect them in that way. And I know recently we've been trying to help people, keep their own family collection safe. And we've talked about bringing them to different places and making sure these stories are kept, because we don't know what is held. The stories resonate. My family was also in Santa Anita, so we're also connected with these stories, but they're different stories. They're unique histories, and so just really grateful that you all are sharing and bringing these in. And I'm sure it's sparking a lot of thoughts about the objects that folks here have and how they're telling those stories. But we wanted to talk a little bit. Also, did you have something before I moved on? Oh, okay. We just want to talk a little bit about less tangible leftovers now. And you both mentioned how families didn't really talk about camp. I think I was really lucky. My dad made sure that I knew my family's history from an early age. But I think we're really unique in that. And even though I'm Yonsei, I'm fourth generation. These legacy of families' history and incarceration has really been passed down. And so I think we talk about how family history was unsaid and unspoken, and resulted in unresolved or inherited trauma, secrets, and so much else. So would love if you could dive in a little bit to these non-tangible, these emotional leftovers, and kind of your personal experiences with those.
Let's go back to 9/11, and I'm sure we all have our own stories of where we were and how that impacted. And I had friends in New York and closer to the actual target sites, but horrendous day for our country. What I didn't recognize was how that's going to awaken latent PTSD in my mom and my aunt. My father had already passed, and my mom and aunt, they were watching the news and everything. They seemed okay. About 4 weeks later, I had a planned trip. And I thought that was about the time we were being encouraged as Americans to go on with our regular lives, to get back, traveling and from a business standpoint, keep the activity going, to stop the kind of the break that we had from this traumatic experience and get back into our daily lives. And so I was going to go on this short trip, and I go to my mom's house, and my aunt was there, and they said, "Why, you can't go." And I said, "Well, I'll only be gone a short time. What's the problem?" And my mom said, "What if they come and get us and you're not here?" And I was like, "What?" And they said, "No, what if they come and take us away and you're not here?" And I realized decades later, this is the first time they'd ever said anything like that. Now, my aunt and mother, I would kind of just bundle it up and said they have a real fear of abandonment. And I think that comes from being taken from their homes, their mother dying in the camps. But this was kind of the first time they spoke it out as it was really happening. And I had to realize, wow, this is PTSD that had gone unspoken. My aunt had other things that kind of go back to this camp experience, where we would do our taxes. She was the bookkeeper for our farm, and those taxes had to be gone over 4 times with a fine-tooth comb to make sure every cent was in order. And when I started to pay taxes, she helped me, and I was like, this is ridiculous. It's right. It's okay. Let's move on. And one day I said, "Why are you so perfectionistic about this?" Kind of when I got braver, I was probably in my 20s, when I said, why are you driving me crazy? And she said, "If it's not right, we'll get arrested." Okay, that word arrest. It wasn't if it's wrong, we'll have to pay fines, or if it's wrong, we'll have to do it again. It was, we'll get arrested. Again, it's kind of those signs of this latent PTSD. And I think how that affected me, and this is a long kind of life journey, but how it affected me is I realized that I really had my self-worth was based on what I could do, not who I was. And I think my aunt and mom took that manifestation of we have to be productive, we have to make a difference, we have to, obligation was a huge part of their lives. And I think part of it was because they felt very unseen and unheard as young, 18 and 19-year-old girls going into this, when all of their friends were going to college and getting married, they were going into a camp situation where there was no future. They also saved things like letters that their friends would write, and it would have clippings about, this young man went to the army, this young woman is engaged to him, and all the news about what was going on back at home in Santa Ana. And they kept those letters because that was kind of their lifeline to the outside world. So that's one leftover, more from an emotional standpoint, that some of it used to drive me crazy when I was a kid because everything had to be right. But when I unpack it with just a few phrases, I realize that was a leftover, a traumatic leftover from them. On my dad's side, I want to talk a little bit about gaman or gambatte. Japanese phrase, they now kind of use it at baseball games like, let's go team. But in my family, it was never let's go team. It was, we're going to make this work. We're going to persevere and make this work. And more of that fortitude, it has to be right. We have to get this done. We have to survive. And this might be kind of an interesting slide for you because my dad is on the left, Seiko Tad Munemitsu. This happens to be his high school graduation picture from Huntington Beach High School. And then the man in the middle, Mr. Frank Monroe, if you read my book, you'll hear more about Frank. He was the local banker who, when my dad was about 8 years old, became my dad's mentor. My dad would describe Mr. Monroe as the best friend you could ever have. He didn't have a prejudiced bone in his body. Tells you a lot about Frank, right? Frank helped my father at the beginning of the incarceration to find a way to lease the farm to the couple on the right, Mr. and Mrs. Mendez. Mr. and Mrs. Mendez would move from Santa Ana to Westminster. Their children could not go to the segregated white school in Westminster, California. They fought with 4 other families, and you have the case Mendez versus Westminster that in 1947, before Brown versus Board of Education desegregated the state of California. And that's a whole nother story. But the reason I put this under Gambatte is basically we're going to find a way. People could not stop the war. They could not stop the incarceration. But with the help of friends and the kindness of people like Mr. Monroe and the collaboration between our family and the Mendez family, they got through it. And our farm was there. They were, with all the lease money and the money that my dad made, they were able to pay the property tax and keep the farm. And so this Gambatte is really our own perseverance, but also became a community through this other story that we're linked to. The other thing that I love about Mr. Monroe, I never met him personally. He died before I was born, but I would go to his wife's house every Christmas. We would take a Christmas gift to Mrs. Monroe. And I kind of always wondered what happened to the rest of her family. But 2 years ago, through Facebook, actually, we found her family. And Holly, I don't know where you're sitting, but Holly Monroe Ellens is here, is Mr. Monroe's granddaughter, and happens to live in Tommy Dyo's neighborhood. And so I'm finding Holly Monroe Ellens, that could be her. Hey, Tommy, you're Facebook friends with her. And that's how we connected. So, like Tommy said earlier, we are all connected, right, in a community. And it's just beautiful to be able to know Holly and her 3 brothers. But the legacy of their grandfather is a big part of our story. I think the other thing on Gambatte, a couple things. My dad used to say, education is one thing they can't take away from you. And so he was very, very encouraging and helpful in making sure that I could get the education that I wanted. I would also say education and faith are something they can never take away from you. But just that word, they can't take it away from you. That's a leftover from camp, right? Because so much was taken away from our family and the 125,000 individuals that ended up in the camp. What can they take away from you and what can they not? So interesting phrases that, make me value my education, my faith, the things that are inherently part of my life and part of my soul that cannot never be taken from me. On the lighter side, I've spoken about my book now for about 4 years, and every once in a while someone will say, I just can't believe how productive the Japanese Americans were in the camps. Like, they're building schools, they're building tofu factories, they're building koi gardens in the middle of the desert. And this one person said to me, if that happened to me, I would be sitting there depressed for the next 3 or 4 years. And I thought, wow, that's Gambatte. That's also like, I think, wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is a phrase that means finding beauty in the imperfection of tangible things, but I also think in the imperfection of life. And I don't know how many know about bird pins, but bird pins are one of the things that the Japanese Americans in many of the camps started to create. This is my collection. The top 6 bird pins were all made in Poston, Arizona. The bottom 6 are smaller and much more refined, and they are Takahashi bird pins. Our friends and neighbors, the Takahashis of Garden Grove, not only made these in camp, but they made them as a little side business in the 50s and 60s. And the red cardinal is the one Mrs. Takahashi gave to me, but she gave the others to my aunt and my mom. But this is a sign of, in the midst of that horrible situation, birds can fly free. And even though there probably weren't red cardinals in the desert of Poston, they could imagine red cardinals, hummingbirds, other beautiful birds of color. And I think it's interesting, when I first looked at the ones from Poston, they're very rough. They have a safety pin on the back. I think this one picture here kind of shows the safety pin. Very rough, not polished at all, versus the Takahashi 1960 vintage pins. But I think just the concept of making something beautiful when you don't have this beauty to really look at. The other log here on the left I brought, it's a manzanita log. It doesn't look like much, but it is polished. I dust it. I keep it in my house. And I'm not sure who made it. I think it's probably my grandfather and my mother's side, but I'm not sure who made it. But this has been in our house forever. And someone said, why do you keep that thing? I'm like, I like it. Because I think, again, this is a leftover that when you don't have anything, you can make something beautiful out of what's around you, finding that beauty in imperfection. And actually, the picture turned out much better than I thought. But this is a piece. But can you imagine just going out there and saying, oh, here's a piece of manzanita, wonder, what can I do with this? Not realizing that 80 years later, your granddaughter would keep it in her house, right? But I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful because of the story. The last kind of thing that to me is a leftover is this idea of eternal gratitude. This is not my phrase, but some of you may know Dr. Art Hansen, who is a scholar, is particularly about the Japanese incarceration. He's a professor emeriti at Cal State Fullerton. And I reached out to Art when I first wrote this book, and I said, I'd love you to read it, see helped me fact check it, and he was so gracious. So I said, I'd love to take you and your wife to lunch. So I met up with him, and I thanked him, and I had a gift for him, and he just starts laughing. He goes, there's that Japanese-American eternal gratitude thing. And I just looked at him, I'm like, oh, I'm really grateful for you. And he goes, no, I know. He goes, that's that Japanese-American eternal gratitude. I had never heard that phrase. But what he was saying is, there is something in us that when someone extends such graciousness, particularly probably someone who is of another ethnic race, he's a Caucasian professor, we do have eternal gratitude. Every time I send out my newsletter for my book, Dr. Hansen writes back, hi, Janice. I'm like, hi, I'm eternally grateful for you. Because it's become this joke. But I noticed that this thing about eternal gratitude, my father had it. We went to Mr. Monroe's wife, his widow's home, every Christmas as a thank you with a gift. And one of Holly's brothers said, oh, yeah, there were lots of Japanese little gifts at Christmas, cookies or something. But I do think that those extensions of kindness meant more to our families because that wasn't what they got in a world of prejudice. That wasn't the norm. And when people like Mr. Monroe or Mr. Mendez or other neighbors in Santa Ana, there's many names that we can count of the white community extended graciousness or kindness to us, there is this extension. Now, why I have the Santa Ana courthouse there is this is a real physical manifestation of that eternal gratitude. In 1970, the picture on the left shows the grand opening at the base of the Santa Ana courthouse, this tea garden. Farmers, small business people in Orange County, my dad was on the committee. They raised $50,000 in 1970 to build this tea house and Japanese garden at the foot of the courthouse, the justice system. This newer picture is from a couple years ago. But this photo says a lot. It says, dedicated and presented for the pleasure of all people in Orange County by the Japanese American community, a grateful arigato in honor of our pioneer fathers and for the blessings of freedom. May 27th, 1970. I remember putting letters in envelopes when I was in junior high school. Never knew why we were doing this, but it sounded like a good idea. It wasn't until a few years ago I realized, oh, wow. My dad and all of his friends and business people in Orange County, they were commemorating 25 years having left that camp and being able to come back to Orange County. And not to say there was no prejudice, but when I think about, and I've asked some of those family friends, who took care of your house when you were gone? Who took care of your farm? All of them had somebody. It might have been a Mexican neighbor, a white neighbor, a Mexican employee. They all had a name. And I think this is maybe 6 or 7 families that I've talked to. So it was gratitude, this kind of eternal gratitude for being a neighbor, being a lovely neighbor, a friend. And they had friends to come home to. I think it made a huge difference in our family story.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a really powerful story. And I think, I hope folks pick up your book as well, not to just promo it, but because of the stories that you tell in it about the importance of kindness and that reoccurring theme throughout it. And just, I think a lot of folks felt really abandoned in knowing that there were also these stories of solidarity and allyship and friendship are so important. Tommy, did you want to talk a bit about your history and your family?
Yeah, so sometimes when you find leftovers, you don't know what they are until you start digging. Like, why is that black stuff in the jar in the refrigerator? And we've had it for years, and actually useful. Didn't know it. Well, we have files like that. We have stuff in our collection that are those leftovers, but they have emotional things behind it that I didn't realize. So in going back to the whole, we knew that my grandfather was in Lordsburg, Santa Fe, and then Crystal City, but we really didn't know why. We thought it was a Pancho Villa thing. Remember back that Pancho Villa story, and we thought that was a bunch of like drunk grandpa stories. We didn't really, that can't be true. And then we heard on the Ken and Bob show, remember that? KABC Ken and Bob show? That's something they said, these scholars found a document that talked about termination with extreme prejudice to take out Pancho Villa. And they used 4 Japanese, Fujita, Sato, and Dyo. Dyo is how you mispronounce my last name. Somebody called my brother. My brother called the station. They found out who the scholars were. We called the scholars and found out it was indeed true, all this Pancho Villa stuff. It was crazy. But that's actually not that significant. So we thought, again, why? Well, it's significant. But we thought, well, he must, it was classified, right? That was classified information. That was top secret. That's probably why he went to Lordsburg. But actually, that's not true. And we found out that my grandfather, through a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, my brother-in-law and my sister helped dig this stuff up. There was an FBI file, and it has a 4-page document, 3 or 4-page document that outlines why my grandfather was arrested in Gila and put in the Phoenix jail and then eventually sent to these DOJ camps. And my grandfather started this really neat club called the Harmony Club. And the Harmony Club was all to get along. But it was actually an anti-draft club to say, if you're incarcerated, and this is during the volunteerism, this is not the draft part, but this guy was kind of promoting, fight for our country. And my grandfather spoke so against this that he broke up these rallies. And it disturbed the whole rally. And he was arrested for breaking up these rallies. And it specifically said on the document, because of question 2728. So my grandfather was a badass no boy. And I had no idea until we dug this up. So it's both pride of emotion, like, oh my gosh, he stood for something that I knew nothing about until relatively speaking recently. So that's kind of an emotional baggage that, left over that I didn't know I had. And then why do we have these photos? What are these photos? Again, we know that the tar paper back is Lordsburg. That's the first stop. It was actually a POW camp, but they didn't have any POWs yet, so let's send the Japanese there who are high risk. And then after they got that established, they sent them to Lordsburg. And if you look at Lordsburg, Lordsburg is a little different. So my grandfather's in both these photos. It's not that relevant, but the architecture of Santa Fe is very, very specific. And to find him, he's in front of the dog, kind of like me. I love dogs. He's right in front of the dog. That's my grandfather. Those are very, very significant photos when you add up why he was there. It wasn't about Pancho Villa. It was because he was fighting for this country on a different level. He was fighting, says, don't fight for this country while we're incarcerated. And that says exactly that in the FBI file. And it's one of the artifacts that I have here. All these are copies, so don't worry about losing them. But it's very, very significant find. The other photo that haunted us in our family was this photo. The photo, that's my family. That's the gregarious Joe clan, their family. That's how they look. They're dapper. Well, I'm not so dapper, but they're all dapper. My uncle, just beautiful. But there's this other contrasting photo that did not make any sense at all. Look at their eyes. What are their eyes telling you? Crying? A lot of emotion? That's not my family. That's not how they look. I didn't understand this photo. I still don't really know where this photo is. But Janum had a photo in their exhibit. And it said Crystal City, Texas, intake photo. And it was the same lighting. I don't know if that's an intake photo. But it totally makes sense because the only people who were in Crystal City were the people in this photo. And it could have been a time where they were reunited for the first time on an intake photo. I don't really know. But when I see that photo, I get choked up. I really get choked up because that's part of my family. My senior patrol leader is here when I was a Boy Scout, and the junior assistant scoutmaster is here, the Ikeda brothers. And little Boy Scout story. So, Kei Tanahashi on the right, my daughter was in a film, and one of the executive producers wanted to put a little Easter egg in the film. It's a little picture, and the Easter eggs are these background stories, right? And the reason why it was in there is because it's Tanaka Studio. And Tanaka Studio was kind of before Toyo. They were contemporaries at one time. And there's a whole story behind the Tanaka Studios. And I saw that photo and I go, I know exactly when that photo was taken. It was taken in 1935 because I saw the patch. And if you look at the other photo, that's Soichi Fukui. 1935 World Jamboree. That didn't happen until 1936 because of a polio outbreak. And I found out that these guys, Hitoshi and Kei Tanahashi, helped start our Boo 379, Koyasan 379. I said Boo because they were our competitors. They were so good. So they started my uncle, my grandfather, Kei Tanahashi, they started Troop 379. Very significant. And then I found out that through some other research that Kei Tanahashi went to Lincoln High School, the same high school as my mom, and so they all knew each other. And so Kei Tanahashi eventually went to UCLA, was a member of ROTC, got a commission as a second lieutenant in 1937-38, and then he was serving, and then the war broke out. And then he had a chance, well, now he's an enemy alien, even though he's an officer. He got to go visit Heart Mountain, and he got married to a gal in Heart Mountain. Not my mom, you probably knew each other, but I mean, you know. And it turns out that just recently, well, through this research, I found out that Kei Tanahashi was killed on July 4th, 1944, on Hill 140 in Italy. This is a good one. So my mom said something completely obscure to this story, way before I even knew about this story. She said, when somebody from 379 was killed, and my grandfather found out, it was the first time she saw him weep. And I didn't know that. I heard that story way before I knew about this photo and this thing. So another Heart Mountain connection. And he has no descendants. That's why John Tanaka has that photo. And he's connected to Heart Mountain. And he's one of the several men that were killed in Heart Mountain. Again, the story behind pictures. You as you uncover them, they bring up emotion, strong emotion. And again, the whole barracks, we just thought this was another thing of Heart Mountain. But we turned out it's Santa Anita racetrack. And we talked about Santa Anita with Joy, with your dad. That he...
Yeah, I mean, just my family also was, my grandmother, my bachan, Miki Yamaguchi, was taken to Santa Anita first as well. And I had never gone back, and I was at the 626 night market. And when my dad came to pick me up, it was the first time he had ever been back. And the emotion that I could see he felt in that moment was so intense. And I think when you think about the connection to the power of place and just being physically in those spaces, it's so charged. And it's so important to have these kinds of records. Because I know for a long time, Santa Anita didn't have that record. There was no official, some people are like, there's a bigger monument to Seabiscuit than to the Japanese Americans that were there, right? And so I think it's so powerful to make sure that we're telling these stories. June Burke, who's a volunteer here at JANM, we're doing a film about her and her. She's gone back in the film, she goes back to the barrack to the horse stall that she was incarcerated in. And is like, this is where my family was. And my family has a similar story to showing up, and it was a horse stall. And she was very young, middle school age, but still also, I think to the end of her life, it was impacted her. And then me as a fourth generation, as I said before, Japanese American, I know there's things that I have inherited and behaviors I have that I've had to think through and, been lucky to process with my dad and with my family. But just, it keeps going. And so it's important that we're acknowledging this. And I think our community does not like to acknowledge it a lot, especially the emotional. I don't know if your family was like this, but my family didn't like talking about emotions. So I'm grateful for both of you for telling these stories and making sure that they stay relevant to us. And, I think I'm thinking a lot about just, there's so many connections across both of your stories, and then back to the museum and back to many people, I'm sure, in these audiences. And I think also to, the moment that we're in right now of just, it's a scared moment, a powerful one. So I just wonder, as people are processing kind of through these feelings, if there's any kind of insights or thoughts that you all have on how, what advice or insights can you give to people as they're going through this journey of uncovery and discussion?
Yeah.
You all want to? Yeah.
There's not much else to say, right? We need to treat people differently. And I think us in this room are now all advocates of this story and how to process it and how to treat our foreigners as ourselves. And this is an ancient text that talks about how to treat people. We treat them like our own. And we're not quite doing that. And one of my best friends just sent me a text right before I came and sent me his whole transcription of his mother's testimony online. And he goes, don't read the whole thing, just read the last line. And it says, we need to do this, we need to tell these stories so it doesn't happen again.
I have a story. After I wrote this book, I was going to speak at the Santa Ana Library, City Library. And so we had a few meetings, and then one of the librarians sent me a note separately and said her mother said that her father worked for my dad. Maybe you remember him. So I said, well, what's his name? And send me a picture, because I was just kind of a little kid. I worked on the farm really through high school. But we did have a lot of Mexican workers who would come. We had about 6 or 7 of them who would stay 10 months of the year. They basically lived on our farm. I grew up with them, sort of, but all of these men and their sons were full-time kind of employees of my dad. So I thought maybe it's one of them. So she sent the picture, and I'm like, he kind of looks familiar, but no, he's not one of our full-time guys. And her mother came back and said, no, that man in this book, in my book, that is the man that helped bring me to America. And so actually, my friends, the Shintos, are here, and Bruce was there at the library with me when we met this lady. And she comes up and she just gives me this hug, and she says, it's your father. Your father helped me to come to this country. So we said, well, tell us more. I don't know the story. And she said that my dad told her husband, who was probably 10 or 15 years younger, save your money. Don't go to the bars in Santa Ana. You save your money and you get an apartment and you bring your wife to this country. And then I said, oh, that sounds like my dad. That's and Bruce is up there. Bruce was with me. He goes, oh, that's Tad Munemitsu. So my dad gave him this advice, but this man did this. And then she says, your dad wrote a letter, signed some papers that said that he's employed and that his wife is coming, and that my dad signed off it. Now, I don't know what form that was. I don't know what it is. But that family they were able to come. Her husband sadly passed a few years ago, so I never got to reunite with him. But she, obviously her daughter, well-educated librarian, serving the community. They have a couple other children. That's what America's about. That's how my grandfather, through the kindness of an Italian lady, gave him a chance to lease some land to get started in farming. Right? That's what I believe we're about. And with my faith, I believe that, every human was created in the image of God and has immense value, and that there is nothing. Yeah, we have different characteristics, different customs, but we're all our value is all equal. And but that story kind of reminds me of isn't Isn't that what we want? To be able to help each other, help another thrive because somebody helped us thrive, and that's why we're here.
Thank you so much for sharing. I do think we all take a collective breath, deep breath in together. I know we've been holding a lot, and maybe, so everyone breathe in together, deep, and then let it out. Thank you. But I want to open it up actually to the audience. I think that the stories, well, I want to give you one moment before we open it up, if there's any last things as people think through their thoughts. But we'll be running a mic around, and would love to hear from you. We do ask that you keep things short so that we can get to as many folks as possible. But are there any thoughts from you all as Elizabeth runs the mic out, or any questions from the audience? I know you all aren't a shy audience. I have a question for Tommy. Okay, you have a question for Tommy. We're going to bring the mic just so we can make sure we capture it here.
I may be showing my ignorance, but what were questions 27 and 28?
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, put me on the spot. Okay, so there are two poorly written questions. The first question basically said, will you fight no matter where you're called to go? And this question is asked to children, to women, and to men. And so, will I serve this country? Am I going to send me to the front lines?
Yeah, I mean, essentially the two questions were given as a part of a questionnaire that was midway through the war when they were considering opening up to drafting Japanese Americans. They weren't initially allowed to enlist during World War II. And you can jump in, but they basically asked, would you be willing to serve for the country, and then would you be willing to forswear your allegiance to the Japanese emperor? And a lot of folks felt like, well, folks felt there was many different ways that people answered the question, and it was a lot of confusion because a lot of them were American citizens. They're like, I don't have loyalty, or they've been here, so it really created a huge rift.
Very ambiguous questions.
Ambiguous questions, and it created a rift in the community between folks that answered yes and folks that answered no. They were called no boys, often the folks and they were taken to higher security concentration camps like Tule Lake if they answered no. And I think it's still something that our community feels to this day as a rift between, but I think there's been a lot of healing and repair recently, which is exciting between folks that answered different ways. Sorry, I just jumped in on top of you.
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want the official? We'll get to those. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll have folks talk to Marvin after or one of our volunteers. We're going to open up to other questions, but yeah, there's a lot of work out there with the two questions, and kind of colloquially called the loyalty questionnaire for the community. No, thank you for asking. I think there's a question up here at the top.
Okay, my name is Richard Murakami. I was incarcerated in 1942. I was 10 years old, and I was in 3 different U.S. concentration camps, Tule Lake, Jerome, and Har Mountain. The reason why we would travel so much is because of the so-called loyalty questionnaire. But the reason I want to mention something is that, you talk about what my father left us. There's only two things that we have, and both things is something he did. I brought samples here. When we were at Tule Lake, my father would sneak out of camp when there was no moon. He would sneak out of camp, and he would get a tree stump like that. I brought one here. And then when we went to Jerome, my father was a truck driver, and my uncles were the lumberjacks. So my father was a truck driver, so he would get tape. We call it kobu, knot. I don't know what the scientific name is, but we call it knots from the trees. So I brought one from Tule Lake and the one from Jerome. The one from Tule Lake, my father had 5 or 6 of them. But when we left Tule Lake, because of baggage space, he only saved one. That's the only thing he saved, and because we had no room in the baggage. But when we left Tule Lake, there's something else that my mother refused to take. Tule Lake was a lake, so they had seashells. So they used to make things out of seashells, bracelets and things like that. And you know what? My mother didn't take it because the government said, this is government land, you cannot take anything away. So that's how law-abiding our parents were. And then when the museum had an exhibit called America's Concentration Camp, I went to the exhibit because I want to see all of the things made out of the shells and arrowheads. I had 2 arrowheads. We couldn't take it because my mother says, government says we can't take it here. You know what? In the Tule Lake exhibit, there was not one piece of anything made out of the seashells or one arrowhead. And I was surprised the hell out of me. All right? Okay, now, when the museum asked for artifacts, all right, many people donated their name tags and other things, all right? You know what? In our family, we didn't have any of that. Because you know what? I used to call my father. My father was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. My mother was born 5 blocks south from here, so I'm a Sansei. All right? Now, when people donated things, name tags and all that stuff, you know what? We didn't have the name tags and like that. Because you know why? I used to call my father a disillusioned United States citizen. But you know what? 5 or 6 years ago, I said, what he really was, he was pissed off. Pardon the expression, but he was pissed off of what happened to him. He really believed in the United States of America, all right? My father was a kibe. He went to Japan and educated to the 8th grade. But he still believed in the United States of America. He really believed in this country. I still remember in 1940 was an election year. I still remember my mother and father talking about who they wanted to be president. It was not Roosevelt. All right? Okay, I still remember that. And we have, the only things that we have from camp is what my father made. You know, just like I don't know what you call it, a vine stump, a tree stump. I have one from Tule Lake, and like I said, one from Jerome. Those are the only things we have from camp, and I brought them here because I wanted to show it to you people. Every government issued things, I never saw them because my father destroyed them. He didn't want to. And after we left camp, my father never said one word about what happened in camp. Not one word. All right? From 1945, 46, 45, when we left camp, until he passed away when he was 69 years old in 1972. All right? He never talked about camp. My mother used to talk about camp. But I want to tell you what the things she used to say. But my mother, I wore this cap and this shirt, and it says Gaman on it. I was 10 years old, and I wore it in memory and in honor of my parents. Because you know what? I was 10 years old, so I did not have to Gaman. My parents did. All right?
Thank
okay,
you.
I was in camp, and then my wife, Masako, was also incarcerated, but she's a few younger than I. You're younger than I am. So anyway, if you wanted to see what I have, I'll be glad to show it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Richard is one of our longtime volunteers here at JANM, has been here for many years. So if you have questions or stories, I'm sure he'd love to share those in addition to those objects. But thank you for sharing your story and your history with us. Do you have any other? Oh, we have a question here at the front. I'm going to pass you my mic.
Yeah, I just wanted to take an opportunity to share what my grandson, who I'm so proud of, he's 26 and PhD in anthropology. But anyway, he was given a class to interview me as a pioneer. I was a young man, younger than Richard, much younger, and 10 years younger. But anyway, it's interesting. The same question was asked. My grandson said, my students, he was given an assignment to teach a small class, and they wanted to interview me on Moon as a camp pioneer. But anyway, the one question they wanted to ask me was, when they found out I had served in the United States Army, said, why would you do that, And how did you feel about that? And basically, I had to tell my grandson's students that actually my military time turned out very well. And I did not hold anything against the government for having incarcerated us. And I would not have quit or tried to get out of the Army because of that. So I just wanted to bring it up because it's interesting what the young people are interested in today. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Did you have a... Oh, yeah. Anything else that folks in the audience have? You have a mic in the back. Oh, you have a question here. I'll run this here.
It's probably a quick one, but do you know approximately how many people passed away while in the camps?
Not exact numbers, but let me give you a little propaganda. We got, now this is, I didn't experience the camp, so my parents did. But the propaganda was they got better meals in the camp than they did outside the camp. They got better health care in the camp than they got outside of the camp. They got better health care. Everything was much better in camp than they could have gotten, it's equivalent. Well, my wife was doing some study in her doctorate study about infant mortality rates and people who were dying in camp. And actually, the infant mortality rate was significantly higher. I can't give you the statistics. The death age was actually alarming because it was young people who were dying, not older people who were dying, disproportionately than on the outside. So I'm sure there are some statistics and some books specifically there, but it was not as propagandaized, if I could, is that a word? But I'm sure there's some statistics on that.
I was looking in my book because I think I did research on that. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I want to say it was like, for the Poston camp, it was about 10%. But that would be all ages. Don't hold me to that. I know I researched it. But the thing that was interesting is if you go to the Poston Memorial in Arizona, and families have left or have donated funds so that they could have a brick that has their family name and the survivors of that camp. There's many that were infants, that it's in memory of the infants. I was shocked. I don't know how many bricks there are, but it's a pretty good size memorial. It would be very much the size of the plaza outside, I think. And on those bricks you walk by and it says infant, or it just says 2 months old or something. So I think of the conditions. No air conditioning, no heat, central heating. The food was marginal. It got better because they started to plant produce and get some better food, fresher food. But my aunt told me that her mother died of stomach cancer but on her death certificate, I recall it said heart attack. So these were not hospitals. These were, I would say, well-meaning clinics, medical clinics, especially 8 months into the camp. They were there over 3.5 years. So, but I do think at Poston, I recall it was about 10%. And if you go to the Colorado River Indian Tribe Museum, on the wall, there's a list of all who died. And it's pretty significant. I mean, it's a sign about this large and about this tall, and names are pretty small in there. So I just recall kind of 10% at Poston.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely, there's, again, so many stories and so many lives that were touched and impacted by this. And I'm just so grateful for both of you to kind of bring these out and bring them into the light in this room today. And I think leaving us all with much to think about and reflect on as we move forward, especially with how we carry our own family histories, whatever they might be, and how we use those to relate to each other with kindness. I want to give you both just a moment to give any final words and wrap up before we move out into more of a casual conversation and book signing.
Yeah, we'll be here. I'll be here. Janice will be out there in the book thing. But I don't have generational trauma. So why is it every time I talk about this stuff, I start to weep and cry and I can't get through them? And it was just really recently, and I just go, oh my gosh, the leftovers that I have is the emotional stuff that I still carry. And I don't shrink away from it. I let it come. But that's a leftover. And maybe you have some leftovers like that too.
I also just want to let you know that Tommy does an amazing tour of Little Tokyo history. So if you're interested in that, seek him out. Or also, you have a website, I think, that talks about it. But he does that different days of the year. The last slide, I just want to encourage you, not because I wrote it, but he endorsed it. So did Dr. Hansen. No, but I have been amazed. I am the reluctant author. I never sought to write a book, but through the Orange County Department of Education, they, I won't even say encouraged me, they nagged me to write this story. It has been amazing at the wonderful people I've met. Many of you I met through this book. And the stories in this book, but it has been amazing. So I hope it might bless you and your families. It will tell you about California desegregation of our schools as well as the Japanese American story. So encourage you, if you are interested, please check out my website. There's, as you said, there's a lot of resources. I try to collect everything I can that's pertinent there to house it in one place. But I just want to thank you all for coming, and thank you to Janum and Joy, and Elizabeth is somewhere here in Hope that really helped us put this together. So thank you to the Janum family and the volunteers for hosting us here today. Thank you.